thank you very much. And thank you. It's the sleepy time. I'm going to talk. I'm not going to be able to read a paper because I always talk. Thank you, Steve, for organizing this. When he first said that we're going to want to do something with Japanese philosophy and Heidegger, and I said, again? And actually, my dissertation was on Heidegger, Nishida, and Watsuji, so I'm not going to be able to say anything new. So, well, then, but that's okay. So I decided to go. Nowadays, I'm into Miki, so I thought, yeah, okay, I'll do Miki. Maybe I can do Miki now. Yeah. Anyway, what I want to do is to situate Miki's theory of technology in today's context and also the historical context to give a contour of what kind of theory that is. Miki was really one of the first, I would say, in the field of philosophy of technology to have robust historical existential theory. So for that, I think he occupies a very interesting place within the philosophy of technology debate. So I'm going to situate Miki in the context of philosophy of technology today. And to do that, I'm going to situate him in the tradition of phenomenological ontology or experiential ontology. That's your field, Morten. And to contrast that with Heidegger's theory of technology, briefly, very briefly, and then go into Miki's theory with Nishida as a background. Maybe Nakai is a better background, but I just know Nishida better. So, and then talk about what Miki's theory of technology is like and what might mean today, or what kind of things we can do with it today, maybe. Yeah. First of all, philosophy of technology. I need to remove this because I have this. How do I minimize this? Okay, yeah. The term philosophy of technology was, first of all, it showed up in 1877. So the term itself is fairly old, from Ernst Kapp. And today, roughly, there's like two strains of a philosophy of technology in the field. The first one is the humanities strain. And that's the kind of philosophy of technology that talks about technology and culture, technology and ethics, technology and society. And there are a lot of post-Heideggerians in this field who do ethics. And the tendency is that technology is relatively negative in the sense that it's going to somehow ruin us or remove our humanity, or that it's somehow the representation of the technology is not particularly positive. And if not ethics, there are people who do politics of technology construction and technology, critical theory of technology, such as by Andrew Finberg. And I'm going to situate both Nishida and Miki in that tradition. So it's a humanities tradition, but it's on the sort of a political discussion of technology development and technology. And in contrast to this strain within philosophy of technology, there are analytic philosophy of technology and engineering, and there's a lot of ethics discussion going on, but they look at the process, methodology, and practice of how technologies are created and carried out. And the fundamental assumption in that approach, as far as I can see, is that they treat technology still as some version of a tool. So the discussion revolves around the design development, but that's technically driven. So it's not like, we are going to make technology and there are ethical implications of it, but largely they focus on the analytic features of technology as such, or the design of the technology as such. So there are technology studies, it's huge. And there are engineers, there are science people, there are philosophers, there are arts people. So it's an interesting field on its own. So within that, Miki can fit well, I think. Yeah. Philosophically, that's just entirely my own. So blame me if it doesn't make sense. But anyway, Andrew Finberg and I have been developing this idea, and we have been reading Miki and others Nishida mainly, but Miki too. And it's situated in the early 20th century, like between Husserl and Heidegger, but more early Heidegger. I would situate that. I would call that phenomenological ontology. Earlier, I called it experiential ontology, but that got me into trouble because no one liked the term experience. So now I'm going to call this a phenomenological ontology. But it's a term that's been used. But what happened is that it's a redefining of the notion of experience from an epistemological category to existence. So the experience is not a means for gaining knowledge. So it's not about knowledge or not perception, none of these things. But experience is about Lebenswelt and Erlebnis and Erfahrungen. So these are sort of experience in a robust sense, right? So out of that tradition came, for instance, the notion of being in the world. So it's to grasp experience not in the self, but as a phenomenon. So human beings and experience in that sense, it cannot be grasped as an object. It's not an object of analysis. It is rather, it's what we go through that can never be objectified, if you will. Or if you can objectify it in psychology, anthropology, and things like that, but then it's a different thing, right? So it's the subjective part, if you will, except without the category of the subject. So experience in this sense is existential in a very robust phenomenological ontological sense. And it's embodied, and it's often said prior to subject-object distinction. So it's that field, if you will, of an experiential field. So as such, it is concrete, and it's embodied, and Heidegger as well as Miki, it's everyday. So it's not a special state, but it's our everyday involvement. And as such, it's situational and it's lived. And it's directional and intentional. I mean, that comes out of Husserl. It's this intentionality, but it's not consciousness, but it's Heidegger's Zuhandenheit, and we are oriented in the world. And it's indexical in that sense. See, we are like forward looking, right? We don't look at ourselves. We don't see the back. So if we reach out, it's somehow frontal, right? And then, so our experiences are indexable in a sense, and furnitures face us or away. I mean, our world is organized directionally, and that is the field of the given. So it's directional in that sense. It's not a random thing. It refers to us, the space itself. So in that sense, our existence, human existence, is mediated, and it's dialectical, self-actualizing. I mean, these terms we're going to unpack because that's the topic of this talk. And it's historical, political, and cultural in this robust development, if you will. Right? So it's this, the refiguring of the experience, or this notion of the field, it's consciousness being embodied. And it's a spatial, temporal, primordial, existential place, if you will. And in Nishida's terms, it's the world of acting intuition, 行為的直感の世界, and also 弁証法的世界, the dialectical world. So these are the features of both Nishida and Miki, out of which I'm going to develop my discussion. So that as a background, here are some pointers to what Heidegger's theory of technology, what that looks like. It's one of those bastard summaries, but anyway, for our purposes, it's good to have it as a bullet point. For Heidegger, the essence of technology is not merely a collection of tools, but it's a way of revealing the world. And Heidegger's theory of technology is rather late, but the early inkling, or if you will, early ideas are already in this idea of ready to hand. Yeah, I mean, hammer, okay. the favorite tool of the philosophers is the hammer. But anyway, not just the hammer and desk, but anyway, our relation to the world, as I said, right, it's directional. It is already configured in our world, and somehow technology can be developed out of this. But for Heidegger, it just didn't go in the way that maybe Miki did. But anyway, so it's a tool world, but it's a way of revealing the world in rather mundane and in a way that is not particularly positive. Yeah, because it's a gestalt, it's an enframing. So technology organizes and orders the world, shaping our experiences and reducing nature to a resource for human use. So it's an instrumental view of technology that somehow makes us less than what we can be, in the sense of enframing. And it is an instrumental and anthropological representation of technology as tools for human purposes, for instance. And it's an understanding of its implications in existence is rather to make us, it's like a part of the mechanical reduced world, the technology. That's what it does, right? So as such, there lurks always a danger of technology. This enframing can lead us to a forgetting of being, where we become disconnected from the essences or existences in nature. So there's these moments of, sort of a danger of technology, it enframes and so on. However, technology can also be a poetic revealing through a more authentic relationship with technology, which can be achieved through art and poetry. And so technology, some people argue, well, Heidegger's notion of technology is not necessarily negative, but it's a particular manifestation that it's negative. And it could be sort of rescued, right? But the way it's talked about or used is instrumentalist, and it's rather enframing. And that's sort of very common, I think, in Europe. I mean, the European or the German view of technology is rather negative, a sense that it's something not desired. I mean, I went from 25 years in California straight into Germany from the Bay Area sort of a hype of technology. Everybody loved the technological future, and they come to Germany and it's like, whoa, here people don't like technology. It's like, it's better to write with a pen. And then by the time I came to Germany, no one was using a pen. So it's okay. So it's like a shock to realize that there's this world in which technology is not appreciated. Yeah. So anyway, it's a reflection, a call for reflection. So a reflective approach to technology is necessary, and it's especially with respect to our existence and being. So that's what Heidegger's technology is like. And as far as I've seen, it's a fairly typical view at least in Germany. Another background, let me return quickly to Nishida so that the conversation is out there. So this is from Nishida. How does technological formations work? We construct objects outside of ourselves with a goal. But what kind of function? Somebody needs to turn off the microphone. It requires. Hi, Lucas. Hi, Lucas, but you need to turn off the you need to turn off the microphone on your laptop. Okay. だけど、全員ミュートにしても、そう、コンピューターのマイク自体をね、オフにしなくちゃいけないの。いいですか、すいません。全員ミュートにして私の声聞こえる？すいません。そう、だからミュートにしただけじゃなくて、コンピューター自体をあれしないとダメか。はい、OK です。聞こえてます？ OK? Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of function the technology? This is Nishida. So it requires some willing or effort. But just by effort of the will, no objects can be made. See, technology is really about making things in the world, right? So it's not about will. It's not about consciousness. It's not about mental things. Right? So it's embodied. You have to actually use your body. Yeah. One must have an understanding of objects. That's another point. If you ignore engineering, you can't make objects that works. So laws of physics, mathematics, is a part of this experience. Because otherwise you might as well imagine something, but the imagination is not going to make you a bridge that works, right? So Nishida goes on to say that you have to have an understanding of objects, laws. I mean, so it's like about the material world in some hard sense. But things are not created technologically merely through such knowledge. The knowledge is not things, yeah? One needs technology in this process. So what connects the two is actually the technology. So technology is not something non-conceptual or mysterious. To see the world technologically means that the self enters the world and sees it from within. It means that the self works in the world and sees things relationally to the entire world. Roughly put, what can be called technological is this process of the subject determining the environment and the environment determining the subject. And that is straight out of this Nishida's, the dialectic of the historical world. And that's how Nishida contextualizes the discussion of technology, such as in the fundamental problems. So finally, to get to Miki's theory, so Miki's influences, there are several. First of all, Heidegger, his hermeneutical phenomenology and the notion of being in the world, which we will unpack and look at. As we saw from Fernando, the influence of Marx is very substantial. And there are lots of influences for Marx, but the one that I'm going to pick up, it is the ontological conception of history. So history as concrete and transformative actions. It's picked up in philosophy of praxis in 1920s, 1930s in Germany and Eastern Europe, such as Lukács. And from Nishida too, the Koitek Chokan, is acting intuition, is the theme is picked up as concrete historical action. And Benshoho Tekisekai, the dialectical world, is picked up. And that is, we make history, or we make the environment, and the environment make us the dialectic. And the idea of Nishida, such as the technique is an expression of people's spirit, and it interacts with the environment, and through that interaction forms itself and us. So that's also in Miki. And we create things through technique, and in creating them, we create ourselves. That's a theme that is also from Nishida to Miki. Some people say, well, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Nishida got all these ideas from Miki. It's often, I mean, I have to determine this directionality, I would have to read the letters and diaries and figure out when he said this, and yeah, things like that. So maybe you could actually argue that it's a mutual creation. Yeah. And the philosophical anthropology is an interesting essay in 1933 and 1937. He never published this as a book, but it was, there's lots of ideas in it that is relevant to our background, and it's sort of it's all there. So let's just say, I'm going to now start Miki, but I just pick and choose what is relevant to present Miki's theory of technology from three sources. One is philosophical anthropology. The second one is the logic of imagination. And then third is, of course, the philosophy of technology. Yeah. So the fundamental ontological makeup as is expressed in philosophical anthropology, human beings are not simply to be understood objectively. We already said this. They should be grasped subjectively. It's a bit confusing because subjectively is shukaiteki, so it's the body. It's not subjective in shukanteki. Because in Japanese, there is shukanteki and shutaiteki, they are different. Yeah. So this is shutaiteki. The body is doing. So hearing is the fundamental difference between anthropology on the one hand, that's objective science of human beings, and other sciences such as his notion of anthropology contrasts with, on the other hand, and other sciences such as physiology and psychology. So these are sort of objective sciences about human beings. But what he calls anthropology are not objective. So physiology and psychology, such sciences entail an objective conditions about human beings. But anthropology, as Miki calls it, in contrast, offers an understanding of the human from the perspective of the self as subject. So it's from this side, but subject as in embodied subject. And what is this embodied subject like? So everydayness becomes an important category. So anthropology must base its study on the everyday. As I said, says Miki, reality must first of all be thought of through our dealings with others, that is the everyday. This is not taken seriously in philosophy, which is true. Yet, that is exactly the area we must examine in anthropology. Our actual living is full of everyday actions, but clarifying such actual living is the task of anthropology. So he's focusing on the human, but human in this very concrete, robust sense. It's being in the world, it's everyday, it's the whole process of human interaction. And everydayness, world historicality, and historicality, these three notions are the fundamental frameworks of anthropology. So that's how he's going to approach the human. From the same work, in der Weltsein, the being in the world, that's where he makes a reference directly to Heidegger. First, human beings are in the world. And second, human beings make the world. And third, human beings are the world. These determinations are known today through Heidegger. He analyzed the existence of human beings as being in the world. We should call these determinations the conditions of human existence. Conditions of human existence it's the transcendental conditions under which everything is possible, and that becomes the phenomenological ontology in Heidegger. So it's this conditions in that sense, the existential conditions, which the human existence can be analyzed. Miki goes on, however, human beings are not simply in the world. Instead, they make the world by working with the world. And such a world that is created may be termed expression. Thus, thus the second determination shows the expressiveness of the human being. So we are being in the world, but we are also expressive. And that expressiveness is also called poiesis and praxis. Poiesis and praxis, that's like sort of two terms that frames this process of creation. So in that sense, actions are expressive. 表現的行為。行為はすべて表現的行為の意味を持っている。Actions are expressive. Actions are not simply praxis, but also significant as poiesis. This means that actions do not remain internal to themselves, but rather essentially aimed outwards. Actions qua expression are dialectical. 弁証法的意味を持っている。With actions, we are born and then die, and by dying, we are born. It's like Nishida in a way of talking about this. But anyway, so we actually are in the world. We are every day, we engage with the world, and we express ourselves through this engagement, and we are changed by changing the world through this whole process. So oasis is the moment of, see, we are in the world, but we got to figure out what to do, right? I mean, so there's like a constant involvement in this, like a constant expressiveness that's functioning, even though we don't explicitly grasp it as such. But that's how we go through the world. So that's where technology comes in. Technology is not a purely objective process, as if its ends, that is the subjective elements, existed outside it. Subjective elements are already constitutive of technology itself. The unity of the subjective and object in technology is not merely in the head, but materialized in the very process of changing things. So the concrete embodiment in the world, that is a being in the world, is directional, material. We do things in the world, we are changed by it, and we make things. And to make things, we need to understand physics and mathematics, and we actually create lots of things in the world, right? And then we have created all these technological, cars, you name what, whatever, right? And through that, we are changed. We have to change our way of being. And computers have completely changed the way we do things. And in that sense, I mean, you give any example of a piece of technology in the world, we are changed through it, fundamentally, right? So it's in that sense, that materialization of being in the world through which we are changed, that is part of the technology. That's the sense in which he doesn't mean technology as things. And it's not even technology. I mean, there's no such thing as technology. It is this whole process that's called technology. He even calls the institution of marriage a technology. That's a completely interesting moment. That's in the 構想力の本。It's in a book, somebody, 構想力の論理 the Logic of Imagination book. Somebody pointed out to me, Miki talks about the institution of marriage as a technology. And I thought, oh my God, really? Yeah. So that's like this one quote. Yeah. So technology and imagination. Imagination is maybe a bad translation. We've said this over and over. This 構想力 is much more, the imagination is pictorial, right? So it's like a picture-like, but the 構想力 is much more engaged with stuff, with the world. And that's the word. But there's no better translation than imagination. Yeah. So I mean, everybody calls it imagination, but it's much more concrete, actual. So the actuality of this world is founded upon the logic of imagination. That's in Miki's logic of imagination. And there he also has a whole chapter on technology. Technology is this concrete, expressive manifestation of imagination. So it's like a 具体的な表現的な構想力の表現である。So it's like a really so real. Yeah. So imagination embodies these concrete transcendence. Why transcendence? It's because we make things through our bodies, and then that's the moment of going beyond, of creating new things through poiesis and imagination. You create something that didn't exist before. So it's this going beyond in the material sense, and which makes us, again, go beyond. So it's like an entire process of existential transcendence that's part of this whole mechanism, if you will. So through technology, human beings create their own forms of society and culture, and moreover, change them into new forms. Not only culture, but fundamentally speaking, all forms of human action and various social institutions depend on such form-giving activity, right? So for Miki, technology is not just about tools. You can now see it is what he calls technology is a form of life, material process that actually involves material life in a completely concrete way. As I said, right, material life is about real things. And if you deal with real things, You need to deal with the laws of the real things. It's not just, you don't make up how the bridges are going to be made, or you don't make up how computers are going to work. It has to follow a real process. So, and that's the real process, that's beyond our poetic creation. Yeah, engineers work on this, right? So it's the world of engineering. So what that means then, now you see, right? It's a very different take on technology as Heidegger. And it's a rejection of this theory of Gestalt. I mean, it doesn't enframe us. It could, but it doesn't. Fundamentally speaking, it doesn't particularly enframe us because it's not alienated from our own being. And so it's not about encroachment on us, but rather it's something 主体的, subjective material robust as the process. And it's also technology is much more de-reified in the sense, well, there is no such thing as technology. It's technological. Yeah, we are technological beings. It's a process, and it's a description of this process. So it's not a thing or something with essence or something that can enframe us as if there exists such a thing as a technological something that enframes us. It doesn't work that way. We are technology in a way, right? So as such, as technological, the world and we are all dialectically related. So which means then a technological being that we are historically open. So that's the moment in which you can reject this picture of the enframement or this idea of the Gestalt. Yeah. That's probably the last slide. So what does that mean then? See, Miki's context, he died unfortunately in 1945. And his political historical context, it's much more, it's just unrealized, right? It would have been so interesting to read Miki's theory of technology in the 50s and 60s, especially. His context was that the war, and it was the time of a Japanese expansion. He joined the Showa Kenkyukai, the Showa Research Group under Konoe government. But it was, see, the Western technologies, that was the bad technology, right? That's the enframing kind of materialism, rationalism. It's just mechanization. That's the bad form of technology, which was like ruining the world. The whole industrialization and westernization of the world. So the hope is then, well, what else can be said with technology? Well, the hope was that maybe Japan could offer an alternative theory of technology that's not Western. Yeah, so it was like a perfect vision that Japan can enter the world culture and world debate. So, I mean, it's just sort of the Kyoto School bashing has happened today. So you can't, it's difficult to discuss this point. But if you internally look at the logic of it, right, why was it so important that Japan had to occupy this place? Because Japan was at the time, only modernized nation in the world that's not Western. Yeah. And what is our tradition? What is our philosophy? What is our roots? It's not Western. But Japan was able to completely transform itself in terms of technology. It became a technological nation without becoming Western. So what is that about? Well, that's why it was historically an important moment to enter this discussion through technology, because that was the language of the West. Yeah? But we weren't, I mean, the Japanese thinkers weren't Western. So that was the context. It was hopeful, and you know, do what you want with a critique. But it was a very important moment against the West. It's one of the first sustained anti-Eurocentric discourses, way like 50 years before all this and the others were developing post-colonial and decolonial frameworks, right? The Kyoto School did that way before, right? So it's a framework sometimes referred to from Africa or the Latin American decolonial thought, or at least the critique of the West. Anyway, so what would be the philosophical insights today? Well, technology functions as this essential moment, right, of mediation between ourselves, history, and nature even. Nature in the sense of it has to follow natural law in the sense of the physics and engineering and mathematics, yeah? And it's a combination of that with our imagination and creativity, yeah? So technology embodies then the cultural expression and concretization and the dialectic. One interesting example is the development of care robots. These robots that care for people, these cute little robots that is a companion robots. And see, that's a cultural thing. It's just not imaginable. I mean, that cannot exist in Germany, for instance. The care robots, the robots that take care of you when you are invalid or in hospitals, right? I mean, the Germans would find that, not all Germans, but the general discourse is that you hear, oh my God, I'm not gonna, I mean, that's dehumanizing. I'm not gonna have some kind of a robot take care of me. That's creepy. That's just not good. But whereas in Japan, it's better not to burden somebody. And it saves your face. It's not embarrassing. Yeah. And then also you don't have to bother anybody. Yeah. So it's in that sense, it's much better to have somebody that you don't bother. Yeah. So, but these are sort of very cultural specific discourses that influences the particular development of a certain technology as opposed to another. I mean, there are a bunch of little examples like that that's culturally specific in its expression. And that's a radically non-essentialist philosophy of technology. Technology is not a thing, not even material things or the process. It's the dynamic of our, it just names forms of our existence. So it's a de-reified, non-essentialist take on technology. And there's no reason why that has to be pessimistic because it's so open, right? So probably dangerous to be too optimistic because we ourselves are kind of not perfect. But anyway, it's not necessarily a pessimistic view on technology at all. So it's open-ended. So I think that's what Miki's technology is, can be situated. And so that was the last slide. I mean, there's a lot to do, I think. But maybe not a lot to do, but what that we can enter into a discussion about philosophy of technology in that way. And it's also, it's worth pointing it out. Okay, thank you very much.
Probably Professor Lisa was first, and then Professor Lisa, please.
ゆささん、こんにちは。
こんにちは。非常にこれ、面白い問題で、まず第一にね、ハイデガーが、I'm sorry, I'm speaking in Japanese. ごめんなさい。Should I be speaking in English?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I mean, so, I mean, it's not a...
Yeah, when did Heidegger actually start to think about technology? You said it's quite late in his
34, yeah, 1934 or later.
1934.
Maybe a little later. I mean, does anybody know exactly the...
I think it's
time?
kind of crucial to identify that date. So that is my first question. It's just, but second question is, I think Japanese situation and Western situation was a little different because I'm thinking of like Husserl. And he was already addressing the crisis of European thinking.
Yeah.
And that goes back quite early, in the late, And it's to do with the split of thinking into natural scientific and humanistic, and somehow people lost some sort of coherence. And it seems to me the roots for this cautious attitude or distrustfulness, if I may say, of technology goes back a little further in
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so and as opposed to say Japan. And I think Nishida's case is different because he was trying to figure out how action, intuition, how activities formed an essential part of a worldview.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so he was more concerned about making as opposed to technology. In other words, he was more interested in techne or art. In Greek, it's techne and art are one and the same word. And then later, this word techne gives birth to technology. And then my professor Panika talked about technocracy. In other words, moving away from humanity and technology takes over. And I
Yeah.
think we're at the cutting edge today. We don't know, cusp, with AI, all these things, and we become less and less skilled in many things. We cannot do many things we used to do. But in Japan, because of the tradition of artisanship, like in Italy, in England, you look at all the old cultures, they retain, like France, making cheese, all this wisdom, making wine. You know what I mean? Somehow people are fighting against technology. And it seems to me in Japan, they don't have to fight against so far because sushi made by machine is not yet the same sushi made by sushi chefs. Do you know what I mean? It's a very mundane point. But I think that the roots of this question is much more profound. And we need to go back and say it's not optimistic or pessimistic, but it's to do with humanity and how vulnerable we may be. And that was the concern of Nishitani as well, that we were making less and less friends in the real sense of the word. We cannot we cannot make wonderful discourse with friends, somehow that ability and also that time, like a leisure time, we are losing already in the 60s. And he was very concerned about this. So it seems to me how we put this question of technology in what framework might be actually rather important. At least I'm very concerned about this question
Yeah,
from
yeah.
on daily basis,
Yeah.
and you are living in Germany, so you have the best of two worlds, I think.
Well, I don't think so. But
No,
anyway.
you come back to Japan and you can have your Japanese convenience, and then, you go back to
Yeah,
your
it's
German
perfect.
forest, and you can recuperate. But
Well,
many of the Japanese people don't
I'm
have
not
that.
sure about that.
So
Yeah.
it seems to me that all the hikikomori, all these issues in Japan may be connected to such reliance on technology. And if you look at Korea next door, those people who lost their, relatives and family members in the recent air accident, now they're, bullied by internet, right? They said they're making money on their loss and so on. In other words, this is negative use of technology. In other words, who is using technology? And I think that is the question that really concerned herself, for example. So it seems to me that the question can be framed differently. Anyway, that's my immediate reaction.
Okay. Thanks very much for your comment. I think that that's the whole point, right? That not to reify technology as, I mean, technology is much more imaginatively, philosophically configured so that it could be that it's our own expression and making, that point has to be reflected on, right? So, yeah, anyway, thanks for your comment. Yeah. Yeah, there's also, yeah, hi, Okada-san.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. And I'm starting from Heidegger's philosophy of technology. Then, as I first read Miki, and my impression is optimistic. Yeah, to be honest. And I'd like to clarify my impression.
Yeah.
Miki is, I think Miki's view of technology is a bit optimistic. So, as far as I remember, so Miki.
Yeah.
Miki distinguishes technology in two technologies, like the natural scientific technology and 社会科学的技術, social science, scientific technologies. And Miki argues that, so of course, only developing natural scientific technology is dangerous. And he argues that so we have to control by the social scientific technology. And then my question is always so coming up, so when I read Miki, and how, so he argues that we can make a new norm by technology, right? So through technology, we can make new institution or new normativity.
Yeah.
But how we can create this normativity, or how we can judge this newness? Yeah. So how can we change? How can we just judge the changing by technology or changing society?
Yeah.
So this is my big question when I read Miki.
Some technologies are sort of foreseeably positive, right? Like some technology that makes disabled people use their body.
そう必ずしも配列主義を取るべきではなくて、いうところですね。その権利っていうものは、解放を。
And others are completely unforeseeable, right? Internet was introduced as a communication between military.
Yeah.
Information had to be transmitted, right? But look at what happened now. I mean, it's a primary source of communication, and people just took over. So it became a communications tool, but that was not foreseeable, right? So it could be that what we do today is not foreseeable in this way or that way, right? And then surveillance technology, usually we think of it as a bad thing, but nowadays surveillance is used to protect us from illegitimate use. Right? I mean, police has to have this camera that's on social media so that we know that they're not gonna like beat up on people, right? So that it has this moment that can be developed this way or that way, right? So the important thing I think is that non-assumption about its particular outcome, right? And then the reflection about our own involvement, so that we know what can be said, what. I mean, it's not easy because it's not in our hands now.
Yeah, so
corporations make.
That is why sometimes when I read Miki, then it's
so naive.
It's going. Yeah, we can change norm. No. So yeah.
So that's how the Marxist critique has to come in. The corporations make the world. We have no power, right? But it's still, I mean, the democratic use of technology in communication, you can't undermine its power, right? I mean, it's very powerful. Yeah. That everybody can use their handy to record an accident or. But it protects women. So it's in that sense, there are many uses for these things.
Can you read the
Yeah, a moment. There's this.
Samada?
I have one question. Can you give Miki's philosophy a new meaning that is different from Heidegger's philosophy? Is it possible? It's like I gave a talk. I mean, if I answer this, I repeat myself. It's much more optimistic and positive than Heidegger, I think, but at least, but not because it's the same kind of technology that it's presented in a positive way, but because technology itself is completely deconstructed as forms of life. So it's located and ontologically reconfigured in a way that's different from Heidegger. So its existential meaning is different than in Heidegger, I think. It's like a whole new take on Heidegger, not a whole new take on technology. So it's hard to compare, I think, than the Heideggerian theory. Yeah. So it's like from ground up, it's envisioned as a different thing. Yeah.
So I want to sort of
Yeah.
step into this conversation because it seems to me that Heidegger speaks about in framing, and we don't need to go down that road, but we understand that. And there's no way to turn on the framing. Miki, I think the idea here is that technology is the mediation in which we are, and that constructs us. And so this was repeatedly said,
Right.
you know, it shapes ourselves and it transforms ourselves. So there is this element where we are in the mediation structure of technology, and it is transformative of and productive of something. But what I think Miki wants to say is that we have the ability to transform the medium into a means. So, for example, you can say we are in language. Language forms how we think, and so it is a type of technology. However, when I speak about language, I bring language to language as language, to paraphrase Heidegger. I turn language into the means to create the mediation. And I think that this is also what Nishida is talking about when he says it's not just that we are tool makers, but we make tools to make the tools. We have a capacity to make the mediation structure, so we can turn mediation into a means of expression, which of course then goes back into a type of mediation.
Yeah.
But it allows us to come out, back into the subjective, then return into the objective. So it's almost the reverse.
Yeah.
It's not that we're in the objective and then have to go back to the subjective. It's that we are able to, as Ueda would say, exit language and then return into language. And this is what Miki, I think, wants to put his finger on. It's like, yes, this is how technology works, but we can, if we take up the right attitude towards it, we can transform the machine of transforming. And this gives us back some sense of agency. It's not simple, and you have to be cognizant of the machine, but I think this is where I think Miki wants to go.
Right, and look at how engineers think about technology, right? I mean, they are complete subjects of technology, right?
Yeah.
They make things. And so it's not, we are passive, not at all. And it's in all aspects of, I mean, so technology becomes a form of life that involves a particular material in a particular way, but the moment of the creation is constantly part of the process. Yeah. Leonid wrote in the message, in media, art and creative practices, technology is not just a tool, certainly not, but an integral part of artistic expression, yes, shaping aesthetics and meaning, yes. Can we see technology as a form of practical art? Yes, rather than merely an instrument of control. Yeah, it's not merely an instrument of control at all. It could be, but that would be like a alienated moment. We could see that alienation maybe in the way that we're going to be dependent on ChatGPT and things like that, right? But on the other hand, you could also learn to use them in other ways. I mean, we don't know that, how that's going to pan out. And our kids now, they don't even use Google anymore. That's way too slow. So, yeah.
Isaka-sensei, but for me, for example, if I think to technology, I think, for example, to atom bombs.
Yeah,
Or, for example,
totally.
nuclear plants, I think to Fukushima
Mhm.
accident. And so, do you think it's an alienated way to use technology to produce atomic bombs? Or is not in the essence of the technological power to induce this kind of production that we cannot stop?
Yeah, it's, what can I say about this? That's a fairly common way of representing technology already as something that's out of control. Yeah, that inflames us in a way, right?
Yes, for example, think to Europe now.
Yeah.
In Europe now, they have to produce atomic bomb in
That
order
it will be
to contrast the Russia,
right.
and there is
So-
no way to avoid this issue.
Yeah. So in that sense, the enframing is also a real moment, perhaps, right? So Heidegger is not entirely wrong. But I guess what I would say is that, but that's not all. Humans are resilient, right? We can reflect on this process. Just the fact that we can reflect on this process is a beginning of the resistance, right? So that it's not simply the fact, but the process itself, we created them, right? So then that's a historical political moment, right? So that's where you would have to go back to be
But who
able
is
to-
who? We.
Yeah.
You said we created. Who is we?
the one who resists. Yeah, it's a political process. So that we are pretty not powerful when you talk about bonds, but you could organize through an internet way better than the days before internet, for instance. All of the environmental organizations are done primarily through social media, right? So that before social media, the organizations were much slower, for instance, right? So that there's always the negative consequences that we can talk about to emphasize the negative moments and enframing, or you can talk very positively about technology as such. But see, I guess what I would say is that the technology is this, it's a process in which we can actually enter into the analysis to try to understand this process better, or to think of the political ways in which we can intervene, or yeah, I mean, in terms of resistance, small groups, in terms of small groups of policymakers, in terms of every engineering firm that makes potentially dangerous new forms of weapon, medical technology, whatever. There's an ethics committee that goes through this discussion. There's all these measures that has to be instituted. So in that sense, it's gotten better at control. It's not perfect. And it's also still entirely under the process of the capitalist the world making, right? So it's not so successful, our control, but it doesn't mean that our interventions are non-existent or impossible, right? So that I think it is a political discussion. So that's the way in which technology is not about tools, but rather political institution making, perhaps. But that would be consistent with Miki's overall take on technology, that it is not about the things that we make, but rather the whole process.
And Enrico,
Yes.
would your question be more, is the problem technology or a culture that has become technological?
Yeah,
So a culture that has become technological is one that attempts to transform every aspect of life into some type of useful resource. I think this is more what Heidegger then gets to, his idea of enframing. This is a culture that uses technology to enframe everything. The atomic bomb, we're trying to create fusion process on Earth. This thing goes wrong, it'll make atomic, accidents look like, a firecracker. So we've become a technological society or a culture that tries to technologicalize, to try to control and mechanize everything. And I think that's where the danger is, not in the technology, but when this becomes the only mechanism of a culture, or the only lens of a culture. Then it's, I think, what Yoko was talking about is unbridled, if you will. It's unleashed. And then this, I then think, does turn into enframing.
So that it's almost like the process before enframing. Yeah. It's an issue, right? So anyway, it's slightly over time. So we will. So thank you.
Thank you very much.